Your dog has loved you the only way they know how to. Without language, without conditions, with the whole weight of their body pressed against your leg while you read or sleep or sit in silence staring at something they cannot see. They have been doing that since the day they arrived. And the love is real. What the science shows, and what most dog owners never learn, is that love in the world of the dog is not only something that flows in one direction, it is also received or not received. And there are 6 specific things your dog has been quietly hoping to receive from you. Not food, not toys, not even walks in the traditional sense, but something older than any of those. Something that sits at the level of the bond itself. Welcome to Purect Relaxation.
By the end of this video, you will know what all 6 are, why each one matters at the level of biology and the nervous system, and exactly how to give them
one act at a time. You look at your dog all day. You glance at them across the room. You look at them while you talk about them. You look at them to confirm they are still there. But there is a difference between looking at something and truly looking at it. And your dog, whose entire social life depends on reading the body, knows that difference precisely. In 2015, a research team at Azabu University in Japan published a finding in the journal Science that quietly reoriented how behavioral researchers understood the dog-human relationship. When dogs and their owners engaged in mutual gaze, not the hard, fixed stare that canine social signaling reads as a dominance challenge, but a calm, relaxed, blinking eye contact, both parties experienced a measurable rise in oxytocin levels in both species simultaneously, triggered by nothing more than the act of looking at each other. Oxytocin is the hormone that bonds infants to their mothers in the first hours of life. It is the neurochemical infrastructure of attachment, and in this study, it was rising in a dog and a human at the same time, feeding back and forth between 2 different species across a gaze, as if the boundary between them had briefly dissolved. This was the first documented evidence of a cross-species oxytocin loop. The dog was not simply being looked at. The look itself was producing a shared neurochemical event that linked both animals' bonding systems together. What this means for your daily life is not complicated. When you hold your dog's gaze with soft eyes relaxed, gently blinking, the way you would look at something you love, rather than something you are evaluating, you are not just being affectionate, you are releasing chemistry into both of your bodies at exactly the same moment. This is not the stare you use to get their attention or ask them to sit. That gaze has a different quality. Fixed, directive, task-oriented. This is something quieter, something mutual. Tonight or tomorrow morning, try this. Sit on the floor. No phone, no TV, no task, waiting. Find your dog with your eyes. Let your gaze be soft, unfocused in the way that signals safety rather than intention. Blink naturally. Hold it for 5 seconds, 10 if they will stay. What they do next, more often than not, is look back, not the darting, checking look of a dog waiting for a command. Something slow, something that, if you are paying close attention, looks a great deal like recognition. Picture the walk you take most days. Leash sidewalk, a pace set by your legs and your schedule. You cover ground. Your dog trots alongside or slightly ahead. You reach the park. You come home. You check the box. Your dog for that entire walk was somewhere else, not disobediently somewhere else, neurologically somewhere else. Because the nose your dog is walking through the world with is not a feature, it is a primary sensory organ that processes olfactory data at a depth and resolution that has no equivalent in human experience. Where you smell cut grass, your dog is receiving a complete environmental history, which animals passed here, and when their reproductive status, their stress level, the direction they were moving, and whether they have been here before. A single blade of grass is a paragraph. A fire hydrant at the corner is a library. When you pull them past it, you are pulling them past the richest intellectual engagement available to them. Olfactory enrichment research with domestic dogs has found consistent results across multiple studies. Dogs allowed to sniff freely and at length on the walk in a garden through an enrichment session show lower cortisol levels, greater behavioral flexibility, and higher scores on measures of positive affect. The sniff walk is not indulgent. It is, by the standards of what we know about canine cognition, one of the most genuinely enriching things a dog can do in a day. Once a week, build this in deliberately, not as a bonus at the end of the regular walk, as its own thing. Go somewhere that interests them. Let them lead with their nose. If they stop waiting, if they circle back, let them circle. Give them 30, 40, 60 uninterrupted seconds on whatever has caught their attention, even if what has caught it is a patch of concrete that smells like nothing to you. Your dog is not wasting time. They are doing the thing their brain was built to do. The sniff walk is not a concession to your dog. It is a moment in which you stop treating the walk as yours, and in that moment, it becomes theirs completely, in the way that almost nothing else in a domestic dog's day is ever completely theirs. There is a perspective your dog has lived with since the day they came home that you have probably never fully thought about. Your dog spends the majority of their life at knee height, looking up, watching the undersides of hands that reach down from above, the angles of standing bodies that move around them, the ceiling beyond, the faces that periodically look down to address them. And then you stand up, and you are enormous. And the world from where they live continues exactly as it was. Height in canine body language carries information. A dog who is physically higher on furniture, on a step, on elevated ground, occupies a qualitatively different social position than one who is lower. This is not dominance theory in the outdated sense. It is basic spatial communication that is deeply embedded in canine social signaling. A looming presence from above is registered differently in the nervous system than a presence at the same level. When you come down when you sit on the floor beside your dog, rather than on the chair across from them, you change what you are in that moment. You are no longer a column of authority looking down from an angle that makes full contact impossible. You are a creature at approximately the same level as the animal you live with. Your face is reachable. Your breath is close. Your whole body is present in a way that standing across a room never quite produces. Behavioral observations at animal shelters have documented this effect repeatedly. Dogs who received regular floor-level human presence volunteers who came and simply sat, not to train, not to exercise, not with any agenda other than being there at the same height, showed measurably faster recovery from the stress of kenneling and more frequent self-initiated contact. They approached first, they leaned in first. They chose engagement rather than waiting to be summoned toward it. Put your phone down and sit on the floor with your dog for 10 minutes. If they come to you, let them. If they ignore you entirely, let them ignore you. The offer is the thing. The floor itself is the gesture. What usually happens after a minute or two of quiet is that your dog stops performing. The tail wag that greets you at the door is a greeting reflex, enthusiastic and real, but also a kind of presentation. What happens after a few minutes on the floor together is something different, something more like the absence of performance. And that in a dog who spends most of their day interpreting your signals and responding to your moods is rarer than you think. Think about the last time your dog was truly, deeply asleep. Not the light doze by your feet with one ear still tracking the room, but the heavy sleep, muscle twitches, eyelid flickers, the soft sounds that mean they are somewhere far from this house. And then think about what happened. Something happened. You adjusted your position, and they startled awake. You had your phone out and took a photograph, and the camera sound pulled them back. You called their name because you wanted them to come somewhere else. Or someone in the house simply moved too loudly and they lifted their head, and that was the end of it. Dogs in domestic environments have their sleep disrupted far more often than anyone realizes. And this carries costs that most owners would not expect. REM sleep in dogs is structurally similar to REM sleep in humans, and functionally similar as well. During REM stages, the brain is actively processing events from the day, social interactions, emotional events, things learned and things that startled, are being sorted, filed, and integrated. Stress hormones are being metabolized. The nervous system is running its nightly reset. Disrupting this process repeatedly across the average domestic dog's week has documented effects: elevated baseline cortisol, reduced learning retention, and increased behavioral reactivity. A dog that does not get to complete its sleep cycles is a dog whose nervous system is operating without the reset it needs. Witnessed rest is not complicated. It means this: when your dog chooses sleep, you honor it. You do not photograph it because they look sweet. You do not wake them to give affection on your schedule. You do not call them over because they have fallen asleep somewhere. You would rather they were not. You let them sleep completely and without interruption.
This is one of the quieter acts of love because it requires nothing of you but the restraint to leave something alone.
You are not doing anything. You are protecting something, the rest that is already happening, the processing that is already underway. If you want one concrete shift this week, it is this. The next time your dog settles into heavy sleep, notice the impulse that arises to touch them, to photograph them, to call their name. And simply let that impulse pass. Stay nearby if you want. Watch them for a moment, then let them be. The last two acts on this list are the ones most owners never think about. Stay with me. What comes next is smaller than you expect, and more important, you reach for your dog dozens of times every day. On the couch, in passing through a room, When you come home, when you sit down beside them, when you walk past them in the kitchen, and your hand drops to their head automatically, almost every one of those touches arrives without announcement. This is so normal that naming it sounds strange. Of course you just reach for your dog. They are your dog. They know you. But here is what is happening in your dog's nervous system when an unannounced touch arrives. The skin activates a threat assessment sequence before the brain has fully identified the source. This is not a failure of trust. It is the design of the sensory system. Physical sensation arrives and is processed for danger before identity is confirmed, because in the survival context, that nervous systems evolved for knowing what is touching you before you know if it is safe could mean the difference between threat and safety. It does not matter in that sequence that it is you. It does not matter that you share a home and your dog knows your scent and your footstep better than they know anything else on earth. The sensation arrives first, and the check runs before the answer comes. A voice, their name spoken softly, travels a different path. It is received in the auditory cortex, processed for familiarity, and registered as known before the touch has time to land. When your hand arrives 2 or 3 seconds after your voice, the nervous system receives physical contact in an entirely different state, already identified, already registered as familiar, already open, rather than braced. The habit is not complicated. Before every touch, just their name. 1. Softly. And then your hand. You will notice the difference in how your dog receives it. Not the flinch and adjust of an animal mildly surprised, but the lean and soften of one who is already expecting you. The body that comes toward the touch, rather than simply accommodating it. Some dogs who seem touch avoidant are not actually touch avoidant. They are touch without warning avoidant. They have learned through hundreds of unannounced contacts that physical sensation arrives unpredictably, and they have built a slight, almost invisible wall against that unpredictability. Voice-first touch practiced consistently over several weeks has a way of quietly dismantling that wall, not through training, through the accumulated evidence that your touch is always announced, always predictable, always therefore safe. 2 seconds, their name, your hands. There is a thought your dog has never said out loud, because they cannot say anything out loud. But there is a thought they have had in the wordless way that dogs have thoughts, which is closer to feeling than to language. And if you could hear it, it might go something like this. I know when you are tired before you sit down. I can read it in the way you move through the hallway, the pace of your footsteps, the angle of your shoulders, the rhythm of your breathing, before you even reach the couch. I know when something is wrong before you say anything. I have always known that. I knew it the first time it happened, and I know it now. I know the sound of your car from 5 others that sound nearly the same. I know from the way you walk up the front path what kind of day it has been.
I know these things because I have been paying attention to you since the day you brought me home.
Every day of my life has been in some way organized around you. What I have been hoping, is that sometimes you pay attention back, not to train me, or to photograph me, or to show me to other people, just to see me the way I have always tried to see you. I do not need much. I never have a moment at my level, a walk that goes nowhere, your voice before your hand. I have been loving you in every way available to me. These are the 6 ways you can love me back. Every day you leave. You have done this thousands of times. And every time you do, something happens in your dog's body, a cortisol response, an elevation in the stress hormones that activate when pack members disappear and the nervous system does not know for how long. What most owners do not know is that this response is not primarily triggered by your absence. It is shaped to a significant degree by how you leave. Research tracking cortisol levels in dogs across different departure styles has found a consistent pattern. Dogs whose owners used a calm, brief and repeatable departure ritual, the same words, the same touch, the same unhurried pace every single time, showed substantially lower hormonal stress responses during the departure window than dogs whose owners left with rushed exits, prolonged emotional farewells, or complete silence. The nervous system does not simply respond to the fact of your leaving, it responds to what your leaving means. And what it means is something your dog has learned across hundreds of repetitions, from every exit, every return, every variation in how you go. A sudden rush departure is read as urgency. A prolonged emotional goodbye is read as an unusual event that requires extra vigilance. A calm, brief, consistent ritual is read as exactly what it is, something that happens regularly from which the animal has abundant evidence that you always come back. Build something. It does not need to be elaborate or scripted. A specific phrase, the same one every time. A touch on a specific spot. An ear, a cheek, the top of the head, a moment of genuine, unhurried eye contact. 15 seconds. Done every time. Not just when you feel like it, not just on the good mornings. Every time, in the same way, at the same calm pace. Do it even when you are running late. Especially when you are running late, because your dog reads your urgency, and a rushed departure from an already stressed human is the version that leaves their nervous system the most unsettled. What you are doing is not just saying goodbye. You are giving their nervous system a math. This happens, and then that happens, and then you come back. That is the whole message, and the more consistently it is delivered, the more completely their body receives it. You are not the only one counting on your return. Your dog has been counting on it every single time. Your dog has spent their whole life inside a frame you built without meaning to. Every day, your presence, your attention, your touch, and your comings and goings compose the world they live in. They did not choose that world. They received it, and they have loved you inside it anyway, with everything available to them. These 6 things are not grand gestures. They will not take hours. They do not require training programs or expensive equipment or a different version of your life. A soft gaze, 10 seconds at floor level, with soft eyes, a sniff walk, once a week, no destination, no pace, time on the floor, 10 minutes, no agenda, sleep left alone, completely, without the impulse to interrupt. It's a name spoken before every touch. 2 seconds. Every time, a goodbye that is always the same. 15 seconds. Done with intention. These 6 acts, practiced consistently, do not just improve what your dog experiences, they change the animal your dog gets to be more settled in their body, more open in their behavior, less quietly braced against the unpredictability of a life they cannot control. Your dog has a lifespan 10 years, maybe 12, maybe 15 if you are very fortunate. That is not long. It is not long enough to treat any part of it as a rough draft. At the beginning of this video, you heard about the love your dog has already been giving you, the whole weight of their body against your leg, the vigil at the door. You have always known about that love. Now you know how to give it back. The practice starts now. If this video helped you understand your dog a little better, subscribe to Correct Relaxation. Every week, we decode another piece of your dog's behavior, not to judge, not to lecture, but to help you hear what they have been saying all along. This is Correct Relaxation. We will see you next week.